afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be amongst you today. I'm Abhinav Vij, and I lead the analytics and the AI practice for IBM in India. And today I want to talk about an interesting topic, I think, with two ingredients which usually don't go together. The digital transformation that an organization does, along with the role that a CFO plays in it. And I think in the sessions previous, we talked about how the role for a CFO is expanding beyond the core finance function. And I wanted to highlight the stories and the experiences that IBM has had in that specific domain. Now, the common assumptions that we usually have with digital transformation that it is largely driven by the CEO and the CIO office. But today, what we are seeing in the market and also what we've seen with the surveys that we've done with the CFOs is a huge shift in that approach. Now, based on a global study that we did within IBM, where we interviewed more than 2,000 plus CFOs, one of the key learnings that actually came out that this shift has already happened. And I think Ramit briefly talked about it in the first session as well, where close to 40% of the CFOs are already highly engaged or they are leading these transformation exercises, anchoring the discussions across different businesses as well. The other key thing which we've also seen specifically in the Indian market as well, as when these digital transformations actually happen, CFOs play multiple roles. One of them obviously is as the guardians of the financials and making sure the program is on schedule and within the cost budgets that are assigned, but also putting the rigor and balancing the priorities across different businesses as well. So today's discussion is more going to be about what we're seeing from this study and our experiences in the Indian market. So like we talked about, I think one of the key things which we learned from this survey which we did for the CFOs is the view that they have about themselves is actually quite different than what the rest of the world sees them as. When they were asked about the roles that the different CXOs have in a business transformation, they actually said that CEOs play the most crucial role. And when the same question was asked from the CEOs of the organization, they mentioned that according to them, the CFOs are one of the most crucial partners in a business transformation and a digital transformation exercise, which does tell you that CFOs do have a very good handle of the pulse of what is required for a business transformation, but they also understand the underlying drivers of those. So as you can see, I think there are like 5 or 6 key things the different CFOs highlighted. One of the most important ones, according to them, was how do you drive higher efficiencies in a constantly changing environment, right? So Mr. Basu also talked about it in the last session as well, with all the upheavals that have come up with COVID and the changes that are happening in the economy. How do CFOs basically keep a tab on the top priorities, right? And business efficiency and operations efficiency came out to be one of the most critical ones which they were focused on. This is in addition to obviously keeping a tab of the customer experiences that have to be driven, and also how do you drive AI and analytics throughout the organization. So which does give me a pivot actually to talk about how we see digital transformation now happening and the remit for the CFO in that space, right? So when we looked at the discussions that the CFOs have had in these sessions, 3 primary areas basically came out. And like I talked about operations efficiency, the first one came out, how do you leverage AI and analytics to drive these process efficiencies, right? So it's a combination of using intelligent workflows and infusing AI in your processes. Second is how do you keep data and AI at the center of whatever you do, right? So the decisions have to be led by data. They have to be predictive and prescriptive in nature. And it basically then has to be infused across the organization. Now, the infusion piece is really interesting because it does not necessarily mean that you work in the ways that you were working earlier. It also means the way of life of a person who's actually consuming these also changes, which does mean that your operating model also undergoes a change. It has to be more flexible and agile. And I'll talk about a specific case we saw in an industrial sector where the CFO was actually leading this transformation and how they infuse this change across the organization as well. But specifically, if I talk about what does a CFO need to do in a digital transformation, right? There is a view and perspective of what traditionally has been done by CFOs, but I want to actually add on, given the privileged positions the CFOs are in and the viewpoint that they carry, what additional things that we're seeing in the market that they are undertaking. So typically, if you look at it, CFOs are contributing more and more towards digital transformation in their organization. The role is much more than just being scorekeepers and keeping track of the financial metrics. And the reason why the role is changing also is because, first of all, they have a very good view of the operating model and what is driving the changes that are happening in the organization. The second key factor is also they have a keen handle on what it needs a program to succeed. And they've done these transformations in the past where they've seen the failures from a financial standpoint and an operational standpoint. Then how do you leverage those learnings and apply them on a digital transformation exercise? That's the second key factor. The third and the most interesting one, I think CFOs also have a very unique position that they have a very good view of what the external stakeholder wants, which may be the markets or the stakeholders or the shareholders, and what the internal stakeholders want as well, because they work in a collaborative manner across different business units. And this is something which is very unique, that they can come and balance conflicting priorities in a digital transformation exercise. Now, what it means for a CFO in terms of this position that they carry and the viewpoints that they bring in. First of all, we have seen them change and shape the business objectives of a particular organization, right? Now, this means not just looking at how do I get the capital for a particular program, but also defining what the approach for the digital transformation should be, including looking at the key KPIs that that particular transformation should look at. And this defines the why part of it. The second key aspect in shaping these business objectives is what and how of it. So the discussions we've had with CFOs and the programs that we're currently running in digital transformation, they're deeply involved in how it impacts different businesses, how the value is realized from them, and also the transformation timeline and the rollout for those is something that they look at as well. The second interesting thing which actually came out in the last 1 year, which we have observed specifically in AI and analytics, when you do a digital transformation, different business units in the organization have n number of use cases. So for example, for an industrial client we're looking at, when we talk to different BU heads, we got close to 100 use cases, right? Now for a effective digital transformation, you can't pick up all 100 use cases and implement right up front, right? So the CFO stepped in and played a very critical role in prioritizing these use cases across different business functions, identifying the ones which are going to be the most effective in terms of returning value, and also secondly, which will give the most amount of visibility within the organization. So for example, if the retail part of the business of this industrial client did not have a lot of revenue generation potential, but the number of employees and the infusion of AI was going to be visible much more in retail, the use cases for retail were also picked up, besides the core manufacturing and the supply chain use cases. So that balancing act is also where we've seen this CFO actually play a key role as well. The third one around a business case is very well understood. CFO has to lead that, define whether that transformation program actually makes sense or not, and the return on investment is going to be fruitful for the organization. And then finally, which is more of still the traditional scorekeeping role, which is looking at how the implementation and the rollout is happening for the organization and seeing whether it is tracking to what was the original plan, if there are slippages, building a roadmap on how to recover from those, and then eventually realizing it within the time frame which it was planned for. Now, let me now shift to what specific case study I was talking about. And I think this shift in the CFO role is becoming more and more prevalent. And I wanted to share this story for this industrial client where we're working on this large data and AI transformation. Now, this firm had gone through a huge upheaval in the past in terms of trying to adopt digital technologies. They set up their own data platform, they set up some core capabilities, but they did not see an uptake in the adoption of data and AI. Now, whether it was in terms of getting the right reports and enterprise reporting out to different stakeholders, or even in terms of using prescriptive and predictive analytics to focus where your action and your organization will go. So one change which happened right at the beginning of when we started these discussions, the CFO clearly laid out that my focus is going to be on EBITDA. I want profitability at the end of the program, and I want to make sure that two factors are included in this program. One of them was change management, which usually is overlooked in digital transformation programs, which is to ensure that the people who are adopting these new technologies, they actually go through this whole cycle of understanding the change that is coming towards them, as well as they're able to use that in their day-to-day operations as well. The second key factor which the CFO highlighted is that before we begin this whole exercise, go and have a conversation with all the business heads, understand what are their key priorities for the next 1 year to next 2 years, map it out across the organization and give me a view of how it will impact profitability. Now this helps some new data points to be made available to the CFO, which traditionally would not have been the case. Now we begin a program, a digital program with a business outlook view, not with a technology point of view. And the important thing with this was that we laid the groundwork right at the beginning, where we identified that the benefits the program can lay out for the organization, as well as what the client is currently looking to drive across different business functions. This helped them identify the top AI use cases they want to do and also lay out a roadmap of a year and a half on which they will go through this exercise. The second key factor which the CFO actually laid out for us was that most of these organization initiatives have failed in the past due to adoption. And while we ensure that the right KPI and the metrics are identified for this data program, how do we ensure that the people who are going to use it are actually going to be engaged? So we went through this whole exercise of defining what change management means for the organization, defining how communication should go out preemptively before the change actually happens, hand-holding people during the transformation to a digital way of working than the traditional offline way that they were working in. And this then really helps drive up adoption across the organization. The third piece which you see here is more about how do you become the single source of truth. Now, in any industry or any company that you look at, you'll have multiple sources of data, right? And in this case, this organization had created more than 100 dashboards built by individuals in each function and each BU. Now, how do you define what is the right metric to look at when a board actually meets? Can we bring a single version of truth to the executives and to the operations people, which they can completely rely on? It's been built centrally, it's been built as a center of excellence, which enables us to house all the different data sources in one place, have a single golden truth defined for the organization, and run that program as a central capability overseen by the CFO, the set of business heads which are prioritized, and the CIO office as well. The last piece was, just give me 1 second. The last piece was basically around figuring out whether the business heads will commit to this program or not, right? Now, this needed process transformation as well. The ask from the digital transformation was not to bring in a data platform and AI capabilities. It was also to get a commitment from BU heads who were going to be part of these use cases to come and say that they will change processes, they'll go on the ground and implement these as well. So the other key role which the CFO also helped play for us was also be a steward and a promoter of our capability within the organization, saying if we are spending this much capital in the organization, I want to make sure that the businesses actually sign up for returns at the beginning. So it's not just on the partner that they're bringing in, which in this case was IBM, it's also on the BU heads to make sure that they drive these outcomes once the capability is ready. And I think that is a huge differentiation from what you would traditionally see in a digital transformation program. And I just want to quickly spend a minute on how we actually went about identifying these use cases and what is important. When you look at any use case or AI capability, there are 4 lenses you need to look at it from. One is when you implement a use case or an AI transformation, what is the financial impact it is going to bring in? Second is, if it is going to bring a financial impact, how much complexity is going to add to an existing process? Is it going to make it simpler? And if it is going to make it simpler, how faster it is going to be? The third piece is how viable it is to actually do that use case or the data transformation, because data doesn't necessarily always support all the use cases. So right at the beginning, you actually understand what data can do and what AI can enable for that organization. And the last piece is, from a functional point of view, for supply chain, for example, there are some foundational capabilities you need in place. So even though you have a high functioning, high impact use case, you don't necessarily begin with it. You begin with a foundational capability which lays out the roadmap for you. And this is where we brought in a lot of accelerators and our prior experience on typically what route an organization takes from a digital transformation exercise. We also brought in a lot of functional expertise to identify these use cases. So this was not just the technology team which was actually working with the client. We got in industrial and functional experts to identify the route that this transformation has to take as well. And I think that basically laid the groundwork for a very successful transformation exercise. The last piece I just want to leave you with, and I just want to reiterate this point again, the CFO now plays the role of a very key influencer in getting these initiatives started and defining what the financial and business outcome is. They help navigate how the business units and the technology can work together. and then also help track the outcomes that eventually come out of it. It's an excellent example how we've seen CFO take a lead role in digital transformation exercise and keep the focus on the right levers from a financial standpoint as well. I'll be happy to take questions at the end of the session. I'll just walk off, but anything if you want to ask me, I'm outside and sitting in the room as well. Come free and feel free to come and talk to me. We also have a very engaging booth outside which showcases the demos of intelligent workflow and how AI and analytics are actually transforming organizations. So please do come and visit us at the booth as well. Thanks a lot for your time. It was a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much.